Many of us who ascribe to that glass half full philosophy have been looking for all of the silver linings of the pandemic. There actually have been some. One of those for the pork industry was the discovery of ground pork by many consumers. Mike shares that story from the World Pork Expo.
Well, Max, as you know, at the World Pork Expo, of course, half the focus is on the pig producer. The other half is on the pork consumer. And when we think about 2021, pork consumers' behaviors started to change.
Well, I don't know that it was surprising to those of us in the industry, but we really found out that consumers do love pork. So pork sales, along with all proteins, were very strong. But a really interesting surprise was ground pork. When consumers couldn't go to restaurants, their favorite Mexican restaurants or Italian restaurants or Chinese restaurants, they were craving those flavors, and what they found was they needed recipes that contained ground pork. So ground pork became a destination product in the grocery store. And when some consumers couldn't find it, they would actually go to other stores to find it. 50% of the consumers who bought ground pork in 2020 had never bought ground pork before. So we've liked to say that ground pork had a moment in 2020, and we're trying to go with that momentum and extend it.
So how do you do that? How do you keep consumers involved in something like ground pork when their favorite Chinese restaurant is reopening?
Yeah, well, we don't expect food service will go back up as quickly as it came down. So a lot of consumers have refound their joy in cooking, if you will, and they've found out it's a lot more economical than eating out many times a week. So we have that going for us. But also, we have to take a multifaceted approach. Ground pork, while it's very familiar to pork producers, to those of us who grew up in Iowa, a lot of consumers hadn't had it before, and there wasn't necessarily goals placed in the packers to produce ground pork. It was a byproduct, essentially, or even in your local retail store where they cut meat. So we are working with packers to make sure there's adequate supply, make sure they're thinking about it differently. We're working with retailers. We reset a meat case at a local grocery store today, just right here in Des Moines. We took pictures of it. They're going to train 20 stores throughout their system to reset that case, and we're going to look at the lift in sales.
That's fantastic, Angie. There's a lot of excitement as the economy looks to reopen. We're talking about consumers. We're talking a lot about buying and cooking at home. But of course, restaurants are coming back online. That is a great source of demand for pork. Do you expect anything to change on the restaurant side of the ledger as things reopen and the world returns to normal?
We're really focused right now, frankly, on the pork tenderloin sandwich. You've heard about the chicken sandwich wars, right?
Yes.
So we feel like we should insert ourselves into that, and we're working on that.
Well, Max, I know I've been cooking with ground pork for years, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers have as well. And it turns out, in 2021, the rest of America is paying attention.
One more example of the need to pivot as the pork industry did it so well in the year of the pandemic. Well, many producers realize the importance of being flexible during these challenging times. And we'll be joined by some producers at the Farm Future Summit of the week ahead, Coralville, Iowa. We look forward to the visit there as we'll get some insight indeed as to how farmers can move through some of these uncharted waters. We look forward to seeing you next weekend on This Week in Agribusiness. So long, everyone. Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by OMAX Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.